My name is Kathryn Lefroy and I'm an author. Sure. So my latest book is called Alex and the Alpacas Ride Again. And it is the sequel to, I have this one handy as well, Alex and the Alpacas Save the World. Okay, so this latest book, Alex and the Alpacas Ride Again, picks up after where we left off from Alex and the Alpacas Save the World. So at the end of Alex and the Alpacas Save the World, Alex thinks she has saved the world. But then something happens at the end of that book, which, you know what, I'm not going to give away in case people haven't read it. But something happens at the end of that book to give us a hint that all may not be well with the world. So Alex and the Alpacas Ride Again picks up a couple of months after that, where Alex has gone to her hometown. She's gone back to her hometown of Melbourne. And she is back just living her normal life. And quite frankly, she's a bit bored. So when her mum goes off to a conference and Grandpa Jacob comes over to visit from Tasmania, she thinks, terrific, this is going to be a super fun adventure. Grandpa Jacob is not that interested in her having a lot of fun because he thinks, we've saved the world, it's over, Alex, we're done. But then, of course, things start to happen, mystery starts to bubble, evil starts to percolate, and Alex actually has to save the world again. I hope I'm not giving too much away by saying that, but I think people will know that's roughly what's going to happen, yeah. So, yeah, zany hijinks ensue as the alpacas have to come to Melbourne and navigate the city. So they're used to the farm and they have to navigate the city. And Alex's friend from Tasmania, Louis, comes over as well. And yeah, it's a pretty wild adventure set in Melbourne. So the ideal age would be ages 8 to 12 is sort of the standard target market. But I do know a lot of kids, like 5-6-year-olds, who love having it read to them. So it's a rollicking good adventure. It does get a little bit scary in places. So, you know, if you are reading it to the kids, then maybe you can skip over some of the scarier parts. I also know that older people like reading it as well, though. So I get wonderful emails from a lot of parents saying, it's so lovely. They say, thank you for writing a book that we can read to our children that does not make us want to poke our eyes out, which is a lovely compliment, I think. One of the best pieces of fan mail that I've ever got was from a 90-year-old in England who handwrote me a letter saying, I enjoyed your book so much that I didn't read my gardening magazine for 2 days. So I think that's my favourite piece of fan mail that I've got. So yes, target age 8 to 12, but really, look, I like to think that anyone could enjoy this book because even though it's a kid's book, I don't write specifically for children. I like to write a fun story. Fremantle Press, a West Australian independent publisher. So I got the idea for the Alex and the Alpacas series when I visited an alpaca farm in Tasmania, actually, back in, probably 2010. So I was living in Melbourne and I went to Tasmania for a weekend. And I arrived, and I was visiting a friend there, and I arrived at this, it was like an alpaca hobby farm in the middle of Tasmania, nothing else around. And I arrived there, and there was just something magical about that place. Like I literally stepped out of the car and I was like, there is a story here. And I'd never written a book before. I sort of knew that I wanted to write something, but I didn't know what it was. And just this whole story almost came to me, you know, not all of it all at once, but I knew that, you know, I wanted this female protagonist. I knew I wanted these 4 talking alpacas. I knew I wanted some ancient evil that lived in the forest, and there was a forest at this farm as well. So really that sparked for me the idea for the series. And then I didn't start writing it until a couple of years later. So I just sort of let it percolate for a couple of years. And then, when I started writing it, it just all came to me in sort of this flood of adventure and mystery and fun. I'm also a screenwriter. So I split my writing time. Well, I actually split my writing time 3 ways. I write books, I write screenplays for film and television, and I also write for technology companies based in Silicon Valley, so like Google and YouTube. So I write sort of technology articles for them. If you weren't a writer, what would you be? I can't think of anything else I would want to be. Probably I would still be an academic. So my previous life, I was an academic. I was at Monash University. So I probably would still be on that path, but writing is my everything, to be honest. It makes me so happy. Writing a book is not a solitary process, as I'm sure you're aware. The first book, Alex and the Alpacas Save the World, took 7 years between coming up the idea and finally getting it accepted for publication. I had a fantastic writers group I was living in San Francisco actually when I wrote the bulk of this, and I had a fantastic writers group over there who must have read, I don't know, 5 or 6 drafts of the book. Family, friends, they all read it. When I sent it to my publisher, they initially had me go off and do another rewrite before they accepted it for publication. So I used to say to people, I will die of shock if this book ever gets published. Luckily, I did not die of shock when it actually got published. But it was a really lovely journey that took a very long time. And so it was incredibly rewarding when it actually did get published. But yeah, there were so many people who helped. And then obviously at the press, there were my terrific editor, Kate, and the marketing team there are really amazing as well. So even though there's just one name on the cover of the book, there should actually probably be 25 names on there, but it might ruin the beautiful illustration. I'm not sure there's a part of the writing process that I dislike per se. I think the thing that I'm learning the more that I write, so I've had 2 books published now and I've written 3.5 books. So the thing that I've learned is that sadly, it doesn't get any easier when you're starting out. So every book that I start, I think this time it's just going to be a walk in the park. It's going to be a breeze. I know how to do this. You don't ever know how to do it. It gets easier in a sense that the second one didn't take me as long, for example. So Alex and the Alpacas Ride Again was just 2 years to write it, which was a bit better than 7 years. But yeah, going into the process, and that's actually some advice that I would give people starting out writing, is going into the process. It's a very humbling experience. Even if you think you know what you're going to do or you know what's going on, something will happen and you have no idea how to deal with it. But that makes you a better writer. That helps you grow as an author and as a screenwriter as well. I think hitting those hurdles along the way just makes me a better writer and makes me more curious and more determined. So finding the voice for middle grade, I wish I could say it was extremely challenging, but it wasn't, possibly because I'm still a child inside. I don't know. I didn't set out to write a book for kids, even though, like I said, even though this is a kid's book, I didn't go into it thinking, right, I have to write a book for children. So I wrote a book that I would want to read. And I think I probably just channeled my 10-year-old self and just remembered the feeling that I had when I read books when I was 10. And I really wanted to get that feeling into the book. So it wasn't so much the voice that I was aiming for. It was like the whole reading experience for the audience. So that, I mean, I guess that's something I do when I'm writing, is I think as much about the audience as I do about myself when I'm writing. And that's true for both screenplays and books, because books, stories don't exist in a vacuum. Okay, they only exist when you have an audience for them. So if you write something that people don't want to read, then I 100% plot from beginning to end. Absolutely. It changes, obviously, but I'm not one of those people who can just sit down and think, oh, right, what am I going to write today? Where's the character going to take me? A little bit of that happens organically as I'm writing, but I spend probably months plotting out a story before I will sit down and write the first chapter or write the first page of a screenplay. I like to have a very solid roadmap so that I know where the characters need to go, and I sort of and it also helps me work out like the emotional beats that I want to hit with this story. So, I mentioned before that I like writing for an audience. So often when I'm plotting the whole thing, as much of it will be, all right, plot point happens here, here, and here, but it'll also be like, what do I want the audience to feel here, here, and here? So, do I want them to feel scared here, or do I want them to feel emotional here, or sad, or happy, or yeah. And I think that for me is as important as working out like, the plot points of like this happens and this happens and this happens, because I really want to take my readers on a journey. I want them to feel happy. I want them to feel sad. I want them to feel scared, and not all at the same time and in the right order. So yeah, I spend a lot of time plotting out my stories. Do you have any writing rituals? Yes, I do have writing rituals. I am a morning person, so I like to get up when it's still dark outside, and I get straight out of bed. I throw, if it's winter, I'll throw a big sweater over my pajamas, and I will just stand at my computer and start writing. I love the feeling of being creative when it feels like the world is still asleep around me. That is when I can... that's when I feel like I get my best work done. When the world starts waking up and when things start happening outside, that's when I sort of feel like, okay, right, I need to, the day feels like it has a bit more structure and purpose. Whereas prior to that, it's just like, it's a bit like the Twilight Zone, right? Like anything's possible. Yes, absolutely. I read so many books when I'm when I'm working on my own books. I will usually have 3 books on the go. So I'll be reading a middle grade book, particularly if I'm writing middle grade, an adult fiction book, and then I'll also have an audiobook on the go as well, and that can be either adult or kids. It helps me... I think reading widely is really important as a writer, because, I think I have my voice, like my distinct writing voice, but sometimes you'll hear something that someone else has written, and it's not that you want to copy it, but you're just like, oh, wow, I've never thought of exploring something from that angle before, or explaining something in that way, or, it really helps spark new ways of looking at things and new ways of looking at my writing. So I absolutely have many, many books on the go. Also, I feel like my life would be completely empty if I wasn't reading. Reading for me is probably the greatest pleasure in life. A few things that I've read either recently or a little while ago that have really stayed with me. So in the middle grade space, there's a book called Beyond the Bright Sea by Lauren Walk that not many people have heard of, but it's one of those books that just got me here, and I think I've read it about 4 or 5 times now. It's so fantastic. If you haven't read it, then I would highly recommend that. Probably upper middle grade, it would be. One of my all-time favourites for middle grade is The Wolves of Willoughby Chase. I absolutely adore that book, and I read it at least... I still have the same copy from when I was a kid, and I read it at least once a year still to this day. The copy is yellow and the pages are falling out, but I love that book so much. And I think that sort of story has really influenced my own writing, because it's got adventure, it's got these girls solving problems and just, overcoming the baddies. And yeah, it's just fun. It's really fun. In the adult space, what have I been reading lately? I've been reading a lot of crime fiction. I devour crime fiction. That's my sort of go-to when I'm not sure about what to read. Can't think of anything off the top of my head, but just all the crime fiction, British crime fiction I love. So I've got quite an exciting project coming up next, actually. I'm about to start work on a new book, and this will be my first book for adults. So I'm a little bit nervous about it, actually, because even though I've written in the grown-up space, I suppose, in film, and obviously in the tech writing that I do, the target market for that is adults. This will be my first foray into fiction for adults. I'm not going to say too much about it because it's very, very early stages now, but I'm really excited about it. And I had the spark of the idea about 6 months ago, and it just won't let me go. So I know that this is 100% the next project. I've also been working on a screenplay called Whale Shark Jack that's sort of a middle grade audience as well, that we're going to be shooting in Exmouth next year. So May, June next year, we'll be shooting that up in Exmouth, Western Australia. So that's really exciting as well. And that's another a family film really, but, you know, kid protagonists. And that's just been a lot of fun to write. And also fun because film is a much more collaborative process. So there are so many people involved in bringing that story to life, even more than there are in books, and much more involved early on in the process as well. So they're sort of the two big things I've got going on. Lots of other little projects bubbling away in the background that we'll see what happens. I sort of think if I've thought of an idea and it's still with me 6 months later and it wakes me up at night, then I'm like, okay, this has a home somewhere. My pleasure. Thanks so much.